Father always told everyone that I was his greatest pride, but when I got engaged he publicly declared that he would not attend my wedding because my fiancé was from a different religion, forcing me to choose between family and true love. I was 28 when I got engaged, and for a little while, it seemed like everything in my life had finally gone exactly the way I used to only dream. My name is Emily, I'm from Ohio, from a small suburban town outside of Cleveland, with my parents, my dad, who is 62 now, and my mom, who is 59, and my younger sister Rachel, who is 26. Dad used to tell people I was his greatest pride. And for as long as I can remember, he introduced me thus to anyone, whether at church, at his office celebrations, or just even to neighbors we'd bump into at the market. He would brag about me like some dads brag about the score of their favorite team. I was the worry-free daughter, the school hard worker, the varsity track student, the almost top of the class high school graduate, the college student at a respectable college, the stable marketer job holder, the one that never caused him any cause for concern. And for sure, I believed he when he said so. I believed that I was his pride. Perhaps that's why what came later caught up with me the way it did, because it wasn't only that he disapproved of my decisions, it felt like he was taking away this personality he had formed for me. Like all of the things he said I represented to him came with a caveat, and the caveat was that I never stepped over a boundary I had no idea existed. I encountered Adam 3 years prior when I was 25, working late one night in the office on some campaign deadlines. IT guy came by my desk to fix my laptop, and we ended up talking for hours about nothing and everything. He's 31 now, a software engineer, the type of person who talks less and listens more, who recalls little comments you make and comes back to them months later. He's patient with me when I'm stressed, he's supportive without making me feel like I'm trapped, and he has the ability to make me smile even on my worst days. By the time we had been dating for a year, I knew he was the one with whom I wanted to live my life. My mother enjoyed him at once, told me he was polite, considerate. A good man. Rachel adored him too, told me that I finally had a man who gazed at me like I hung the moon. But Dad, he never spoke. He wasn't nasty to Adam, he didn't forbid me from going out with him, but there was a reserve. I figured maybe it was just Dad being Dad, always stoic, not very emotionally expressive. I figured he'd warm up eventually, like he always did. For the record, Adam's Muslim. His family is from Michigan, but Palestinian in origin, and religion plays a big role in his life, yet he's not overly assertive with it. He fasts during Ramadan, he prays, but he's also that person who likes watching football on Sundays and barbecuing burgers in the back. It was never a problem to me. Religion wasn't something that I grew up deep practicing. We went to church for Easter and Christmas, but it was as much habit as it was religion. My dad, though, he's the result of a strict Catholic upbringing, and while he doesn't go to Mass every Sunday anymore, he still holds on to those beliefs in some sort of intangible way. I didn't know that was as ingrained as it was until Adam got down on one knee. The night Adam proposed, we were in Chicago for a weekend. He had brought me to this rooftop restaurant with twinkling lights and a view of the city skyline, and suddenly, while we were having dessert, out comes the ring. I sobbed, of course. Helped him out by saying yes before he even got the question out. I called my mom and Rachel before I did anything else. They both screamed into the phone, thrilled, already plotting dresses and dates. Dad was at work when I called, so I left him a voicemail. Just a quick one. Dad, it's me. I have some big news. Call me back. I pictured when he did call back, he'd be the same prideful dad he'd always been, bragging to his co-workers about how his daughter was getting married. But then he called back, and he was subdued, flat. He said to me, I need to see you when you're at home. We need to talk something over. I'll never forget this phone call. I drove over to my parents' house the following day after work, still basking in the glow of the engagement. Rachel was there, Mom too, sitting at the kitchen table. Dad stood by the window, arms crossed, the way he would stand whenever he was about to give some kind of lecture. He didn't even allow me to sit down before he spoke those words. Emily, I won't be approving of this wedding. I won't be attending your wedding if you go ahead with it. Like that. No build-up, no tact. Like a hammer drop. I initially laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face was stone cold. I felt the air being drawn from the room. My mom gasped, Rachel started sobbing, and I'm standing there, ring shining on my finger, feeling like it was 100 pounds all of a sudden. I exclaimed, What are you saying? You've always said you were proud of me. How could you not show up for my wedding? He never so much as glanced at me when he answered. He merely said, because he's not one of us. He's Muslim. And I will not sit idly by while my daughter marries outside the church. I don't remember much else of that evening, to be honest. I remember screaming. I remember telling him he was being unfair, that Adam was a good man, that his religion didn't make him love me any less. I remember Mom crying quietly, begging Dad to have a change of heart. Rachel embraced me in the driveway afterwards, whispering that she was with me, that she'd be at my side no matter what. But I drove home that night with tears streaming down my cheek, with the steering wheel clutched so hard in my hand my palms were sore. All I could do in my head was hear Dad's voice saying he wouldn't be there, that he'd boycott my wedding instead of standing with me on the single most significant day of my life. And the only thing which broke me was not even his words, it was how calm he was as he informed me, like he had made a choice, like losing me as a daughter was something he was willing to sacrifice for his beliefs. That was when everything started to fall apart. The following days were some of the most confused of my life. I couldn't help but continue running over his words in my head, the chilling confidence in his voice, the way in which he looked past me as though I weren't even his daughter at that time. For a man who used to introduce me to strangers as my pride and joy, to suddenly declare that he wouldn't walk me down the aisle, it felt like someone had yanked the rug out from under my entire childhood. I'd always thought my dad's love was unconditional. Strict sometimes, yes, but unwavering. That night proved there had always been a condition, I just hadn't known it until I tripped over it. And it frightened me, because if his love was conditional, what did that mean for the rest of my life? Could he disown me completely if I followed through with this? Would I have to lose him for Adam? That question consumed me. Adam knew right away. I did not even need to tell him. He could tell by looking in my face when I returned from my parents. He asked me what was wrong, and when I finally told him, he sat quietly, listening, his hand on mine. He did not even say, "I told you so," though I knew deep inside he had probably guessed this reaction from my dad in the first place. He just told me, "I'm sorry, Em. I know you so desperately wanted your dad to be happy for you." And then he hugged me and rocked back and forth with me as I wept. That's the kind of man he is, solid, steady, the kind of man who will hold you while you're breaking without making you feel weak for breaking. But the whole time, even when he was actually holding me, I was thinking wildly. What if Dad would not even meet him halfway? What if my wedding went on without my father's presence, an empty chair where he properly belonged? I pictured it repeatedly, and each time it felt like a blow to the chest. Mom called me a few days later and asked if she could come alone. She brought a casserole, as if food could repair what was broken, and we sat at my kitchen table as she tried to explain Dad. "He's old-fashioned," she said, wringing her hands in her lap. "He's stubborn, you know that. But he loves you deeply. He'll come around." I wanted to, but I just couldn't get over how he'd said it that night. There'd been no wavering in his words. It wasn't like he was struggling with the idea, it was like he'd already closed the door. "You didn't see him, Mom," I said to her. "He meant it. He's not cooperating." She started to cry, and I couldn't bear that this was tearing her apart. She wanted to come to my wedding, naturally, but she couldn't get Dad to change. And she was stuck, because if she flat out disobeyed him, there'd be marriage hell. I hugged her, told her I didn't want her in the middle, but truthfully I did. I wished she would fight for me. I wished someone would shake Dad up and remind him that his religion was supposed to encourage love, not rejection. Rachel was furious, though. She called me the next night, telling me that she'd had a screaming argument with Dad. I said to him that he's a hypocrite, she said. That he can't be walking around bragging about you for years and then dumping you because your fiancé prays differently. I tried to calm her down, but I was relieved somewhere inside. At least one member of the family was going to speak truth to power. She even half-teased. "If he doesn't walk you down the aisle, I will. Hell, I'll wear a tux." I laughed with tears. Rachel's always been the one who speaks the way I'm too scared to. But even her fire couldn't extinguish the ache in my chest. It wasn't about a ceremonial walk down the aisle. It was about my dad selecting his prejudice over me. News spread faster than I had expected. In a week, members of my extended family were calling me. My younger Aunt Linda told me in a whisper that she thought he was wrong, but, "You know how he is, he won't bend." My Uncle Mike called me a couple of days later and said flat out, "Maybe you should just go find someone of your own religion, Em. Why make life more complicated than it needs to be? I hung up on him. It was humiliating, actually, as if my engagement was a family embarrassment. No one asked me anything about the dress or the date. All they wanted to talk about was the brawl with Dad. I hated answering the phone. Adam's family, however, welcomed me with open arms. His mom hugged me so tight when we told them we were officially engaged. I thought I'd sob all over again. His father grabbed my hand, told him he was grateful to have me as his daughter-in-law. It was all I had ever dreamed of from my own father. And yet, far from being comforting, it only stung the more. Because I knew I could have two families that loved me, or one family that killed me. And the one I had always counted on was the one that held the knife. The last time Adam had suggested postponing the wedding, I had nearly broken. We were sitting on the couch together, my head against his shoulder, when he whispered softly, "Maybe we should wait, let your dad get used." My stomach fell to my feet. Wait? You mean, indefinitely? He shrugged again. Just until things settled down a bit. But I couldn't. I told him no, that I wasn't going to let my dad's prejudice dictate the timing of my happiness. But the seed had been planted. What if going on without Dad there would ruin everything? What if every anniversary, every holiday, would be a reminder of who wasn't there? It made me sick. I tried talking to Dad again. I got into my car and went over to the house and asked if we could go out for a walk, just the two of us. He agreed, begrudgingly, and we walked around the neighborhood in silence until I finally burst out with, "Why can't you just be happy for me?" He stopped walking, looked at me with this worn-out expression, and said, "Because, Emily, I believe that marriage is sacred. And marrying outside the church isn't marriage in God's book. I couldn't pretend to be happy with something that I know is wrong." I told him, "But it's my life, not yours." And he said, "And it's my soul, not yours. I'll have to answer for what I endure." That was it. No matter how much I argued, no matter how often I stated Adam was good, kind, loving, he would not budge. He'd rather hold on to his creed than hold on to me. I came home that night shattered. Because I knew I couldn't fix this. I couldn't reason with him, couldn't reason him into exposing his heart. The choice wasn't his any longer. It was mine. Did I still want to go through with it knowing my dad would never be there, never introduce me, never say a blessing over my wedding, never take my children into his arms someday? Or did I want to lose the man I loved in order to keep my father's approval? Undefined, it was like being asked to amputate a limb. Undefined, either way, I'd be losing something I couldn't reclaim. Undefined, and I didn't know which loss I could endure. The weeks turned into months, and the tension at my home never broke. If anything, it intensified. Each time I spoke to Dad, it was short, formal on the surface, but laced with this underlying standoff. We didn't fight every time we spoke, but neither did we laugh. We shared this ceremony, a call a week from him, just to ask about work, about the weather in my area, about the books I was reading. He never missed. But the night that thing occurred, the calls stopped. When I called him, he answered, but it was as if talking to a stranger. Quick responses, no warmth, no "I'm proud of you" any longer. It was like I'd already died to him, and he was just going through the motions out of obligation. That might sound dramatic, but when you've lived your whole life being your dad's pride, the silence is louder than any screaming match. Meanwhile, wedding planning went on. Mom and Rachel tried their best to fill the gaps. Rachel came with me to shop for dresses, and I will never forget standing in front of that mirror in the bridal boutique, veils secured into my hair, Rachel sobbing as she whispered, "He should be here. He should see this." And I nodded, sucking my lip in, because she was right, he should have been there. But he wasn't. Every milestone, every choice, his presence hung over us in the background like a specter. Picking a venue was less exciting and more a matter of planting with whom would stay away. Making the guest list was more a matter of planting landmines, attempting to forecast which family members would offer their support and which would boycott in discreet solidarity with Dad. The hardest part was the public one. Dad did not restrain his feelings. At a family barbecue over the summer, standing in front of neighbors, uncles, and cousins, he said to them straight out, "I will not go to my daughter's wedding because she is marrying out of the faith." I was carrying a plate and I stood there, embarrassed. He said it like it was a badge of honor, as if he was defending something grand, and I wanted to scream. The look on everyone's face, it was like they didn't know whether to pity me or pity him. Some people wouldn't even glance at me. That moment burned into me, because it was no longer private. It was no longer just him and me. He had publicized it. He had chosen to make my engagement a moral issue. And I was humiliated in front of my own family members. Adam tried to shield me from it, as much as he could. He told me not to read Facebook when a cousin whom I barely knew wrote some passive-aggressive remark about having left your roots behind. He held me in his arms as I cried when Aunt Linda pulled me aside and said, "You know, your father only wants the best for you." I continued to grapple with him. "Do you regret proposing to me? Do you ever regret bringing me into all this trouble?" And every time, he'd look at me with his eyes and tell me, "Never. I love you. That's all that matters." And I had to believe him. But there were nights, when the house was quiet, I'd lie awake wondering if love really was enough when your family was coming apart at the seams. Mom stayed in the middle, and that was almost as painful as Dad's rejection. She'd visit me with scraps of cloth, help me stuff envelopes, and then she'd shake her head and say at the end of the night, "Your father's heart is hard, but he loves you." I wanted to yell at her, "If this is love, then define hate for me." But I never did. I just nodded and let her believe she was helping, though each reference to Dad's love burned like salt. Rachel, for her own good, would not remain neutral. She stopped going home as often, said she couldn't stand Dad's stubbornness. He's choosing his religion over his very own daughter. She spat one night. I don't care what reasons Mom gives. That's what's happening. And for her to tell me so, out loud, for once, made me less crazy. And then the church conversation. Dad called me one evening out of the blue. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks. For a moment, I think he'd had a change of heart, maybe he'd make amends. But he responded instead, "Emily, if you're dead set on marrying him, at least do it in the church. Then I'll be able to come." I stiffened. It was no peace offering, it was a condition. He was negotiating my wedding like it was a bargaining chip. I told him, "Dad, Adam is not Catholic. It wouldn't be fair to make him do something that's not his religion." And Dad just spurted out, "Then don't expect to see me there. I won't be in a union if God ain't blessing it." My hands shook so much that I nearly dropped the phone. That phone conversation ended with me crying uncontrollably on the bathroom floor, clutching the phone as if it were a weapon. Because in that moment I realized, it wasn't about religion. It was power. It was him wanting me to break, to prove to him I was still the daughter who lived by his dictates. And I couldn't. Not at that moment. Adam's family, again, was exactly the opposite. His mother cajoled me one night if my father's absence would make me regret marrying into their clan. I fell apart crying at her words because the truth was, no, I didn't regret Adam. I regretted my father. I regretted the chasm he was carving in my life. And I resented that his absence would tarnish the best day of my life. Adam's mom embraced me, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You are our family now. Don't let anyone take that away from you." I clung to those words, but they did not erase the pain. With the wedding date approaching, I started having visions of Dad. Visions in which he did appear at the ceremony after all, slipped unnoticed into the back pew, and then surprised me by walking me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. I'd wake up crying, because even in my sleep I was still begging for his approval. Other nights, I dreamed the opposite, that he burst in, objected, humiliated me in front of all of them. Both nightmares left me unsettled, exhausted, caught between hope and fear. My therapist, I finally started going to one, because I couldn't handle it alone, explained it was grief. "Grieving the father you conjured up," she said to me. "You conjured up his love as unconditional, and now you need to deal with the fact that it isn't. That's a loss. Losses need to be mourned." I sat in her office stunned, because I'd never thought of that before. But she was correct. I was mourning. I was mourning a father who may never have lived the way I had pictured him. By invitation time, the battle lines were drawn. Mom RSVP'd yes, of course. Rachel was my maid of honor. Adam's whole family responded enthusiastically. Dad never returned the RSVP card. Not even a no. Nothing. And that nothing said it all. My wedding morning, I woke up with this strange mix of excitement and terror rolling around in my stomach. I'd fantasized about this day as a kid, dressing up in Mom's old scarves, using dandelions as a bouquet and walking down an imaginary aisle. In each and every fantasy, Dad stood beside me, taking my hand, smiling. Today, on the wedding day, that image was shattered. My heart was hurting so badly that I didn't think I would survive, but I also couldn't let it kill me. I had Adam at the other side of that aisle, and he was all I'd ever imagined. I wasn't going to let my dad's death turn this day into a funeral. Mom arrived in the bridal suite early, clutching a small box. She gave me one, weeping in her eyes, and when I opened it, there was a gold bracelet, slender, delicate, with minute engravings on the inside. "It was your grandmother's," she said, fastening it on my wrist. "She'd want you to have it today." And so do I. I hugged her back, both of us crying, and for a moment let myself pretend that maybe, just maybe, she was silently rebelling against Dad by passing on this piece of family history, conveying love when he wasn't. Rachel arrived late, hair half done, makeup smudged from having already cried, and upon seeing me in my wedding dress she emitted this sob-laugh combination. "You're a queen," she whispered, straightening my veil. "And I swear, Em, if I catch one single person mumbling that Dad's not here, I'll throw cake at them." That had me giggling so hard, my stomach actually hurt. God, I don't know how I would have survived without her. When the music started and the doors opened, I had a tightening sensation in my chest. This is where a father puts his arm around his daughters, usually, but mine was alone. Rachel looked at me over her shoulder, hoping for something, and I nodded almost imperceptibly. And just as she had promised, she walked with me down the aisle. Not in a tux, not embarrassing, just like my sister, rock and hard, soft-spoken. "You got this," with each step. Seeing Adam standing at the altar, eyes full of tears, was what propelled me the final distance. At that instant, the pain of Dad not being there was present but submerged. Love propelled me onward. The service was lovely. Adam's vows left half the guests in tears. My own quivered slightly as I read them, but when I declared, "I choose you, every day, even when it's hard," I meant it with every fiber of my being. When the officiant uttered the words, "husband and wife," and we shared our first kiss, the room erupted into applause. And for an instant, I felt complete. Surrounded by people who had come seeking to be there, people who had chosen to love us unconditionally, I sometimes wondered if maybe I'd been given a new kind of family, one formed by choice and not necessity. But even so, I couldn't help it. My eyes scanned the sea of faces in front of me for him. For Dad. A scratch that I could never shut off. And when he didn't appear, my heart shattered again. It was like half of me couldn't believe that he wouldn't show up, that I was waiting for the classic movie moment, when he bursts in at the last minute, turned around. But it never came. His seat was empty. The reception was a mix of joy and sadness. We danced, we laughed, but no toast was ever entire without his. Rachel gave the maid of honor speech of the century, talking about how Adam and I balanced each other, how she'd never seen me happier. Mom stood up too, her voice shaking as she said she wished certain people could see what she was seeing. That was as close as she ever came to speaking out against Dad publicly, and I could see the strain on her face. She was proud of me, but she was still tied to him, still in the home where his word was law. Later, when we were the only two of our group stumbling around on the dance floor for our first dance, he bent down and whispered, "I know it hurts, but look around. Everyone who matters is here." And I smiled, my cheek pressed into his shoulder, working to make that so. But that evening when the party was done and we'd gone back to the hotel, I fell apart. It all descended upon me at once, the finality of it. My father truly hadn't appeared. He'd skipped it. He'd chosen not to be present for the most important day of my life. I sobbed against Adam's chest until my head ached, and he just held me close, over and over again saying, "I'm here. I'll always be here." That was when I realized I wasn't going to wait all these years for Dad to change. I wasn't going to leave an empty seat for him in my heart, hoping someday he'd return. If I had, I would have been denying myself the opportunity to fully accept the family that I was building with Adam. So I made a choice, in that same hotel room, to release begging for Dad's love. To accept that sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you totally don't. And sometimes, the family that you build is superior to the one that you are born into. Dad did not call me during the weeks that went by. Not even once. Mom came by with leftover flowers from the reception, Rachel sent me goofy selfies to brighten my day, but Dad did not say a word. Others asked me whether he'd come round, if maybe he was remorseful. The truth? I have no idea. Maybe he sits in his armchair every evening rationalizing to himself that he did the right thing. Maybe he does have a stab of conscience when he looks at my wedding photos on Mom's mantle. Or maybe he's so caught up in his brand of faith that he's not sensitive to it all anymore. I quit trying to speculate. Because what he chose is no longer mine to carry. Now, months later, I look back and realize that my wedding was the best day of my life and hardest. I married the man that I love, with the people who came with open hearts, and that would be enough. But it was also the day that I lost the father that I thought that I had, the one who would say to me that I was his pride and joy. I wept for him even as I made my vows. And maybe that is what life is, really. Learning to carry joy and sorrow together. Learning love can take root even in the holes left behind by loss. I don't know if I'll ever be okay with Dad. Maybe someday he'll knock on my door and meet me halfway. Maybe not. But this much I know, I chose love. I chose Adam. And I'd remarry him, even if it means being tormented by the emptiness of that chair for the rest of my life. Because in the end, my husband isn't about who would not stand beside me, he's about the one who would. And that, I think, is what I'm proud of.